to the Max MPS Radio. I'm your host, Jan Frisse, and I actually have this from you. And I'm honored to have Steve Hall, the founder and one of the coaches of Revive Stronger, in this podcast. So, hello and welcome, Steve.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on, Jan. It's good to be here, and I'm excited to be your first English guest. And yeah, let's rock and roll into whatever you want to kind of talk about.
We will talk about the practical application of the volume concepts of Dr. Mike Israetel. I think you are one of the people who can give some real good insights into this, because you not only applied them to yourself but also to clients for quite some while now. And before I ask you how long actually, I just want to give yourself the opportunity to introduce yourself for maybe some people who don't know you yet, which I think will not be that much, but just in case.
No, that's cool, and I appreciate it. So I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. So I am Steve Hall from revivestronger.com, and that is basically a online coaching service. We have me and Pascal Floor on the team, and we coach a lot of Gen Pop, but mostly trying to target towards more competitors. So bodybuilding, bikini, they're probably our main clientele. We have some powerlifters as well, but we're really going for those competitors. And we are also a content provider. So I have my own podcast, which hopefully your listeners will be aware of, Revive Stronger, the Revive Stronger podcast, in fact. And we have ran seminars. So we've had Mike Israetel over twice to the UK, and we'll be having him again this year. So stay tuned for that. And we also are on Instagram, things like this. And me personally, I first kind of got into this whole thing kind of as it was a bit weird, really. So the way I got into bodybuilding was basically at university, I suffered a pretty horrific injury to my head after being on I was like a long distance runner or mid distance runner, really. And I just came out of hospital, really wasn't in a good way, was pretty unwell, and kind of used bodybuilding, used nutrition, good training to build myself up, and learned a lot in the process, and then decided the human body is pretty fucking cool. I want to help other people. I actually ended up working in London, office jobs, kind of was going down that route, but eventually decided to do part-time PT courses, became educated, was an in-person PT for, and I'm not sure many people are aware of that, for about 6 months full-time. And I slowly transitioned to be an online coach and moved into London, and it was a big risk. Moved into London with a girlfriend with barely any income, not that many online clients, and just had to work my way up. And I've been doing it for years now. So I think over 3 years or something, which is crazy to me. Cool. And now the really, really crazy thing is the people I looked up to and who I aspired to be like Eric Helms, 3DMJ, Lyle McDonald, the first people I ever got any sort of education from, I'm now kind of friends with, which is nuts. And I don't think they realize it. Like Eric, I don't think he realizes how much that's such a weird change for me. But yeah, that's I say short intro to me, but maybe it was a bit longer than I intended.
Cool. No, that was great. All those guys you just mentioned had a huge impact on my own career as well, like my humble career as an online personal trainer. And yeah, let's get started. I just wanted to ask you how long you actually applying the volume landmark concepts of Dr. Mike Israetel to yourself, and also then you can talk about applying them to your own clients.
So I think I've been applying them basically once I read the scientific principles of strength training, and I pretty much read that quite soon after it came out, because I learned about Mike, had him over for the first conference in the UK with Mike Samuels back way then in 2015, I think it was. And ever since kind of learning about those concepts, I've been applying them and learning more about them as I apply them, as you do with any kind of tool that you're kind of implementing. And also talking to Mike on the podcast and on a one-to-one basis, just because we're friends, and kind of digging into the concepts is really quite interesting. And you learn so much when you do apply it to not only yourself, but you apply it to your clients as well. And the way I've kind of utilized it and my ideas behind it have kind of maybe morphed over time a little bit, and my understanding has improved. over time as well. And yeah, I'm so glad that he came out with it, because as a coach, and I'm sure you'd agree, Jean, that it's invaluable to have that concept, to really have a way of thinking about training in that way, especially for hypertrophy. Like, is this too much? Is this too little? Is it enough? And really having ways of determining that with the different volume landmarks, and being able to explain it then to a client, like, we're going through your mesocycle, we're going to start off here, we're going to try and aim towards this, rather than just being like, okay, here's your mesocycle, go train, go, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think he was also one of the first people actually to define volume, like just in terms, and I think it's a great concept, and with a lot of misunderstandings. We will dive into that later. So my first question is actually, how did you found your own personal volume landmarks, and how do you approach the ones of a new client?
So for myself, it's really been a learning curve. So, and I wouldn't say I like, if you ask me, what is your MRV for chest? I'm never going to tell you it's like, oh yeah, it's definitely 25. Like it's probably going to be a range of like 20 to 30. And that's something I want people to be very aware of, is that there are ranges on these things. It depends on kind of like it's difficult to know exactly how to talk about volume. Like, what about volume for just hip hinges? But then you've got like deficit deadlifts, you've got deadlifts, you've got rack pulls, you've got good mornings, you've got dumbbell RDLs. It's like each of these are going to be more or less fatiguing, and then they're all going to have different loads. So you can't use volume load, and then it just gets so complicated. And so it depends on what's your nutritional status. Are you in a deficit, surplus, maintenance? That will depend on what your MRV is going to be like. What's your intensity like? Are you doing strength training? Are you doing low rep traditional hypertrophy training? Are you doing metabolite training? Your MRV is going to be a lot higher. So there's so many things that come into it that I don't think people realize. And then over time as well, it's dynamic. So people know, like, calories, like maintenance intake is dynamic, and it moves over time. But MRV is even more dynamic, and it moves even more over time, and it's just as influenced by so many different factors. So the way I've really, and it's continual learning. So it's kind of like, we all know, like, you learn how to squat initially, but the way you learned to squat like 5 years ago to how it looks now is probably quite different. As you've grown more muscle, as your technique has improved, you've probably got deeper. I don't think anyone's asked to grasp when they first learn to squat. This just doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't tend to happen. And the same thing happens when you're kind of discovering what your MRV is. There's going to be a time where you do too much. Like, I think with a lot of things, the best way to learn is by making a mistake. I've certainly gone too much. I've done that junk volume. I've gone crazy high, just to see kind of what my limits were. And it wasn't necessarily an aim to do junk volume. It wasn't an aim to, like, find myself dragging my heels and doing too much, but it happened and I learned from it. And I wanted to put myself through these things before I apply it to clients. And it's very much become a case of knowing my own body. So it's quite interesting. Me and Pascal sometimes talk about our training to each other, and, like, I know my chest doesn't need that much volume. I get a pump from minimal sets, and its MRV is substantially lower than my back. My back can take a massive beating, whereas Pascal's completely opposite. He needs quite a bit of volume for his chest for it to progress, whereas his back gets, like, completely screwed up from nothing. Okay. So you just end up kind of, you have to, and that's why I like the concept of MRV, because it makes you think about your training. How am I responding to this? Is this giving me a pump? Is this getting me sore at all? Do I feel like I've trained? Am I progressing kind of on a continual basis? You need to continually be assessing how things are going. And really, it's a tool of auto regulation. So there might be a lot of stress going on in your life. That's something I didn't even talk about that influences MRV. If you have, like, exams at the moment, like, you have just, that is taking up, like, life MRV, as it were. That's taking up a lot of kind of energy and, like, recovery capability. So you have to take that into account as well. So it's taken me a long time to kind of figure out what sort of amounts I respond to. And generally, I know myself as someone who needs more volume than I think the average person does, which doesn't surprise me when I think about my background in kind of running and things like this, and the fact that, I don't know, I look at my physique and I'm not like, okay, this guy just responds to weight training really easily. He's obviously full of fast twitch muscle fibers. I think I'm one of those people that just is a bit of a workhorse. I have to grind, a bit like I think Eric talked about it. Him and Alberto need way more volume than Jeff Alberts.
Yeah.
Jeff Alberts is just like gifted in that. Well, gifted. He has to do fuck all to grow compared to them. Hopefully I can swear. At least it was in English, so if there's any Germans. So then thinking about for my clients, where do I start? So often it comes from, we know the kind of overriding kind of recommendations. So you can think back to Wormbond's study of like 40 to 70 repetitions per muscle group per week as kind of a range. And you can also think to James Krieger and Brad Schoenfeld's kind of meta-analysis of like 10 hard sets was seen to be like a minimum for optimal growth. So they're good starting points for muscle, like for volume per week per muscle group. And then you can use that in combination with where has that client come from? Are they coming from a background of stupid high volumes where they're not progressing? Are they coming from a background of like 5-3-1, Jim Wendler's 5-3-1? Or are they coming from like, I don't know, more conservative, just like a Lyle McDonald, what's it called? Generic bulking routine, which I have done. Yeah. And then you can use that to kind of think, where should we go? And like with the people doing way excess volume, often I bring them into what I call a primer phase. So I put them through what I think is more like maintenance volume and drastically cut it down. And then there are other people who have been doing like not that much. And I bring them to more that 10 set recommendation. And then you get people just who actually have no idea really what they've been doing. They've been so inconsistent. They've been jumping to different training programs. And so you have to start off with that baseline. And I like to start low rather than high. And I think that is exactly what Mike would recommend as well. Whereas I think a lot of people, like you said, the misconceptions think that he would say low, like you should aim for the stars. But he'd also recommend starting low because you can always add. And that is the reason for it. You don't want to start off with too much because the aim is to move through the landmarks, not kind of start way above. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a summary of my own experience and then with clients.
There was a lot actually. Just for the swearing, I myself found myself swear more in the English language actually than in German. I think it's I was probably making a disclaimer before that I will swear, but now you did it as well, so we can just move on with that. I think there was a good insight into your just like overall approach when you find a new client. I do it for myself, kind of like you do. I just see if what they are doing volume-wise before, and then from there on I just calculate the average and then split it up into the different volume landmarks, and then start probably a little bit more conservative, and then start from there and see what their response is. And to this point, it was always positive. So at least if they had some decent training program before, because if somebody comes to you and do like super excessive amounts of volume, I of course also first off just fix that. Sometimes people come to me with like really screwed volumes, just like body like muscle wise. I saw some crazy stuff, but it got better. And then just individualize over time, I think, is one of the key points. I myself apply it. I thought about applying it on my own for like I think at the beginning of 2017, and then I finally did it after my diet around the Revive conference last year, where we actually met, and I also met Mike. He's a pretty good guy actually, and
he's all right.
He's all right. He's okay. And then I just applied it for myself, and now I do it for like most of my clients, and the ones that I just started it with back in the days were just like I told them that I'm not super experienced in it yet, but they trusted me, and it worked out pretty well. And a lot of them are actually told me that they like this style of training more than having like steady volumes. Mm-hmm. And I saw some great results, and but I think it also is really like just preference at some point. Like I also had one friend who tried it, and he was just like, no, I just like steady volume more, and I think preference is also a key point.
Yeah, I mean, like we all know, and like Eric Helms rightly says in his muscle and strength pyramids, that adherence factor. It doesn't matter
Yeah,
if you've got the
definitely.
most optimal training program on paper. If you can't adhere to it, or you don't want to adhere to it, and you dislike it, you're never going to give your all to it. So I think that's really important as well. And yeah, I like how you told your clients that it was something new to you, and you're just kind of trialing it, because that's something, as practitioners, we learn about new things. And
Yeah.
like the whole, I used to use diet refeeds more often, and now I've reverted. And I mean, for the last, I don't know, 2 or more years, I've more so just ended up combining them and then putting them in as a diet break now and then. And I was telling, and their clients are like, well, why is this changing? Where you kind of explain it to them. New research has come
Yeah.
out. This appears to be more superior way of doing things. That's why. So let's try it and see. And not to say I don't use refeeds at all now. That wouldn't be true. But yeah, there's things that come out all the time. I think good coaches will update their ways and then learn how
Definitely.
to use it.
I think it's super important to evolve yourself, as you said, as a practitioner, and just like changing your mind sometimes. If like the evidence is there and you like apply it and it makes sense and it works, then yeah, man, you should evolve yourself as a coach. That's
Yeah,
why
there's
that go for it.
I was just going to say, there's nothing worse than becoming dogmatic. You can become quite attached to some of and I've seen coaches do it. They can become very attached to their practices, their ways of doing things, and it's provided them results, but they might not be the best ways. And
Yeah.
everyone can think about this kind of I know when I first started training nutrition, like I was very much like clean eating. My parents and my family thought I had a eating disorder. I would like shun white rice and white pasta and wouldn't eat it. And then I learned the way of if it fits your macros and flexible dieting. And I updated my views, and I would have hated to, imagining now if I'd been dogmatic and just thought, no, clean eating's the way. There's no way I'd have a career. I wouldn't be bodybuilding now because I would have burnt out.
Yeah. Sounds kind of familiar. So do you have any practical tips of finding your MRV and MEV? I would like to start about the MRV first, then go over to the MEV, and then maybe talk about the maintenance volume at the end. I mean, the MAV is pretty much your average volume from MEV to MRV, so I think those two are the probably the more important practical landmarks. So how do you approach them, or what are some practical tips you can give the audience and me, of course, as well, for
Cool.
future coaching?
So I'll start off with kind of like the baseline, the start of a mesocycle, minimum effective dose effectively, and then I'll work up to how you might approach going to MRV, if that's okay. Just
Okay.
it kind
Yeah.
of makes more sense in my head. So
Cool.
the minimum effective dose, obviously we spoke about that, and like you look at the client's background, you assess your background, where have you been, what sort of volumes has been providing you results in the past, what hasn't, and then you start off with that in combination what the latest science is kind of saying. Then from that, you do the same assessment that you do that 1 week, like week one, that baseline week, every single week. So you kind of think about different muscle groups. So if you're a bodybuilder, we're assuming looking for maximal hypertrophy, you think about, okay, so how has this felt in my bicep? How's this felt in my tricep? How have my shoulders felt this week? How have my traps felt? My kind of glutes, my hamstrings, my quads. Think about each muscle group, kind of what has their recovery been like? What has their performance been like? How's your motivation to train been? And even when you're looking at your program, and this will be part of looking at your history, like look at that first week of training. Does that look like a hard week of training, an easy week of training, or just like an okay week? It should hopefully look like something okay to easy, because you just want enough to provide a growth stimulus, which depending on the person might not be that much. It might be around that 10 sets. Then you go ahead, do that. And then as you're going through it, you're assessing kind of like, okay, how has my soreness been this week? Soreness is an indication that you've caused some muscle damage. That could potentially be a sign that you've caused kind of an overload. That could be potentially good, but if you're sore so much that it affected your workout performance in your next workout, potentially that was a bit too much volume and you might want to scale it back a little bit. So soreness is definitely one indicator along with performance. So how is your kind of, in terms of what you'd expect in terms of the amount of reps you can get in a particular kind of rep range with a particular load. So assessing all those things, just fatigue markers, and this is what I do with my clients every week. Check in with them, kind of how you feel, like how's this training feeling? How's that volume feeling to you? Are you getting sore? Are you feeling like performance is good? Are your training sessions taking a stupid amount of time? Anything like that. And then each week you kind of look and you're like, right, so I haven't been particularly sore. Performance is like really good. This is like my reps are feeling really smooth, really quick. Like I'm not kind of finding this a struggle at all. I could probably edge in a little bit more. So you might be conservative at first and just add a set to each muscle group if everything was feeling pretty sweet and you hit minimum effective dose pretty well. Now you're moving into your maximal adaptive volume. So this is the most volume you can do and see positive adaptations from, which is where you rightly said you want to be for the majority of the time. This is where the best gains are made, because you can actually do an overloading amount of training and then progress from that. So you can make things hard and harder every week. And this might be a period of, depending on the person, like you could be in this zone for 2, 3, 4 weeks potentially, until at which you will keep doing these assessments. You'll hit this kind of wall in which you're like, right, my sessions are feeling really low. My motivation to train, when I look at my workouts, I'm kind of like, fuck, that's a lot of volume. This is going to be really hard. My performance is starting to stagnate. I'm not actually improving week on week. And if I was to look at potentially trying to make things harder next week, I don't think I could. I don't think I could overload again. Okay. That's probably where you're kind of in that MRV zone. And you're likely to hit systemic MRV before you hit any particular muscle group MRV. That's something to be stated, because every single muscle group, if you hit everything to MRV, as a newbie, you could probably do that. But as you're intermediate to advanced, there's no way you're going to maximize everything, because you'll become mentally drained. Like the systemic MRV will beat you up. And I'm not necessarily sure you need to hit your MRV. Like, I don't think you should be concerned about that. I think what you're concerned about is being in that maximal adaptive volume zone. That is where the best gains are made. So if you wanted to deload and you're not completely convinced you hit your MRV, that's fine. Like, if you're pretty beat up, you're pretty tired, you've made some good gains, be conservative, because there's no point pushing it for the sake of pushing it, because you may well injure yourself. Now, some people who are more advanced, who don't have many gains to make, they might have to push it, because otherwise they just won't see any progress. So then it becomes a decision of what do they want to do, how important is it for them to progress, and you have to take all those things into account. But that's effectively how I look at it. It's a continual assessment of fatigue, performance markers, motivation to train, and then just seeing, do you think you can do a little bit more, or do you think you need to scale it back? And sets can come down or up throughout the mesocycle. I tend to move sets, keep kind of rep ranges relatively level, progress loads slightly throughout the mesocycle, just slight increments, depending on kind of how they're doing and whether they can. Often they stay level kind of on your kind of more isolation exercises, and then moving further towards a lesser reps in reserve. So by the final microcycle of your mesocycle, you're probably getting near to that failure point.
Yeah, sounds familiar. I'm kind of glad that you touched on how you don't have to train to your MRV all the time, and also that there is like a systemic MRV, and that you, as you said, like if you hit like every muscle's MRV, that's just not possible. And that was some great insights, I think. I know that Mike is also Mike talked in his book about an MEV mesocycle. So you just do like what you think is your MEV, and then you see if you actually make progress over the cycle. I think you did one around your show or something. Can you maybe give some more insights about that?
I can. Because this might be somewhere that I don't completely maybe see eye to eye with this idea with Mike, because I even spoke to him about it on the podcast, in that I was kind of looking to, because he suggests in the book, I think, like several mesocycles of like continual adjustments, and it felt like a long time to be potentially not making progress. And because we know these concepts are kind of dynamic, they change and evolve with exercise selection and things like this. It just felt like something unnecessary for me to go through, and I don't necessarily, and I think I can see why he's suggesting it, because I mean, it would be great for you to identify that and have that as a starting point. It's probably a safe thing to do, but I think in practice and with clients, it's not something that I would be able to do with any sort of authority or have any complete understanding that it was the right thing to be doing. I talked it through with Pascal as well, and we were both under the same impression that it's something that it's just not really something completely necessary. The way we view MRV is that it's a tool of auto-regulation, and so you can kind of use these assessments to kind of understand things. And so I didn't end up doing it. I did intend to do it, but then after thinking about it, I was just like, I just don't see it as necessary. I think as long as you're within a range that you are convinced it is your MEV to MAV and then so on and so forth, I don't think it's something that is necessary for everyone to do. I actually haven't spoken to anyone who has done it. I don't know if you've done it yourself, Jean, or done it with any clients, but yeah, we didn't end up finding any. We just didn't see it as something that was going to be useful for us or something we would want to do with our clients.
Interesting, because that was actually one of the things I didn't agree fully with Mike as well. And I think there was also somewhere in Facebook I read it as like a critique point or something. We will dive into the critics at the end, by the way. So do you want to talk quickly about the maintenance volume, or do you think it's... Because I think in the end, maintenance volume, you don't really try to find it, because I think Mike in the book also recommends that you go slightly lower every maintenance phase. And I think at the end, the results of doing like 6 sets versus 8 sets are pretty similar from just the results that you want from a maintenance phase. And you don't want to risk like losing gains, I think. That's at least my opinion.
No, and I'd agree. And this might be the difference between someone who has created the concept and then has these points versus people like ourselves who have then practiced it and are practitioners, because I don't know, personally, to take my volumes down to what kind of some of the recommendations would be for maintenance volumes would be kind of difficult to adhere to, and I think I'd end up keep like strangling myself, even if it's like 2 sets above what might be recommended. And I think you're completely right. I think it's very much like there's a range. If you're within that range and you're coming lower than what you normally would at the start of like a typical hypertrophy mesocycle, you know you're doing less volume than that, you're still getting those benefits. Would you potentially get more benefits and more resensitization and more fatigue kind of drop by going a bit lower? Maybe, but would your adherence drop? Would you just lose your shit and just end up training hard anyway? Possibly. So yeah, when I take clients through what I call a primer phase, like the maintenance phase, I purposely called it the primer phase so that people would see it as something positive. And then I end up trying to emphasize, okay, we're going to try and gain some strength here, kind of give them a goal, because no one likes the thought of just maintaining, because it just sounds a bit dull and boring. I explain what the purpose is in terms of like maximal hypertrophy. It is to reduce that fatigue. It is to allow kind of resensitization to occur, and strength isn't necessarily the goal, but why not aim for that right now? And I often like it as a way of also testing, kind of like Eric Helms does at the end of some of his mesocycles, is kind of do a test. How much strength have you gained in a particular rep range that's appropriate for hypertrophy? I use it as an opportunity to kind of assess that as well. So if you're hitting some PRs during that phase, it's a pretty good sign that you've gained some muscle over the last phases.
So you AMRAP after the maintenance phase?
You could do. I've only done that myself. And I did that by kind of accident. But I tend to just allow them to try and hit PRs as comparative to previous times they've been in that strength phase, rather than kind of deload and then hit AMRAPs. Because again, if your goal is maximal hypertrophy, if you're spending so much time testing whether you've gained muscle, then you're kind of wasting potential time you could be gaining muscle. It's kind of that argument of being a bit more proactive with your training versus very reactive. And I side there with that testing element to being more kind of proactive and just assessing like for like mesocycles rather than having a specific test.
Okay, maybe we can talk about the pro versus reactive approach later as well. We kind of did that before we actually started the podcast, and then we realized like, oh, we should probably start now because this is actually pretty interesting. So I will just go further with my next questions. Actually, what are your experience with clients who went climbing the volume landmarks versus clients who did steady volumes, and what were basically their experience and what were their not results but like their how did they respond and how did they liked it?
Cool. So, yeah, I mean, in the past, before I knew about MRV, and I'd never even thought about progressive overload with sets. I'd only ever done it with rep ranges. And I'd more so like learnt from practical programming by Mark Ripito and Kill Gore, and used those sort of concepts and used the concept I'd learnt from like Lyle McDonald and Eric Helms and all of them. And that was really the main kind of literature out there as far as I had found for bodybuilding that was kind of relevant, specific, science, evidence-based. And I found that both approaches worked. So those worked in the past. I still got clients' results, and they were great. However, there were times where I wasn't utterly confident and convinced that I was doing the most appropriate thing and getting them the best results that I could. I found then when utilizing more of the MRV approach, having that tool, I could really explain to my clients in a very confident way that we were doing everything we could to take them towards their goals of kind of growing muscle. And that then led to slightly superior results, because especially, and the way I was I was assessing that would be the combination of kind of seeing them progress a bit faster in terms of kind of their gains, and also just because of their comments. That was probably the main thing, like just having clients comment how like they just enjoy this approach. Now when they approach deloads, they understand more so why that's happening, because they really feel like they've earned it. And I'd always used the term kind of earning your deload. That is something I used before MRV had come out, but now it really kind of, it made more sense to them, and I could explain things a little bit better. And whilst I think strength gains were pretty good before, and maybe strength gains for some of my clients aren't as great right now, I think the fact is strength is, whilst a really cool thing, it's become more and more well known that strength is kind of a tag along benefit from training for muscle growth than the goal. So yeah, I think both approaches certainly worked with my clients, and the overwhelming response was that clients really enjoyed thinking about volume in this way and having that conceptualized approach. And that, along with the nutritional periodization that I then utilized with these phases and using kind of the MRV thing, that just led to kind of superior results. It was just much more structured, I found.
Cool. I have some similar responses as well. I also like it, personally, I like it more than just like doing steady volume and chasing loads kind of for progressive overload.
Yeah.
I think actually Celine Schneider, you know her. She was a client of Revive. She asked me if I could ask you if you have any clients that you still program more steady volume, and if you do, why do you do it, basically?
Cool. No, yeah, definitely know Celine. So hopefully she's listening to this. And we met. She came to the Mike Israetel conference. So, yeah.
I met her there.
Yeah, no, she's a really nice girl and very smart herself. And so yes, there are people who I do steady volume for, but that is still with the idea of MRV in mind, because the reason I'm giving them steady volume for the most part is whether they're going through a mini cut. So during the mini cut, I don't tend to exaggerate volumes particularly. It is more intensity increases. So during the mini cut, volume is kept more steady because I use it as a bit of a resensitization phase, depending on how I'm programming that mini cut, because there's many ways you can do it. But using Mike Israetel's kind of mini cut approach, in which he's using it to potentiate more muscle growth, and it's just a 4 to 6 week period. During maintenance phases, I tend to not chase MRV. I tend to just kind of keep volume nice and low. So I keep it at maintenance volumes. And then during calorie deficits, during kind of people who are doing contest prep, there might not be set increases week to week. It may just keep steady, because we know when you're in a calorie deficit, your actual maintenance, your minimum effective volume, and your maintenance, but your minimum effective volumes come up because you haven't got that nutritional input keeping your muscle growth going. So your MEV, the least you have to do in the gym to keep muscle growth, is going up and up and up as you're getting leaner and leaner and leaner, and you're in a calorie deficit. But your MRV is actually coming down. So the most you can do and recover from is down, because you're in that calorie deficit. You haven't got that extra nutrition to give you recovery. So then they come to a point, and the horrible point is when your actual minimum effective volume comes above your MRV, and then you're like, right, now I'm losing muscle. You don't know this is happening. You would never tell a client this is happening, because you wouldn't even know yourself. But yeah, they're coming much closer. So each week, you're kind of just the intensity increases, which is probably going to increase volume, is going to bring you to your maximal recoverable volume. And that might also be the case for someone who's very advanced. I know Mike's talked about it before, but the least they need to do to grow is actually very near to the most they can do and recover from. So then you would also see that more kind of flat approach. But I don't think the way Celine was asking it was that, and she wanted maybe not that answer, but I thought I'd include that. For the most part, I don't use that kind of old traditional linear approach within my programming as like an approach. It's always with the volume landmarks in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just because you do steady volume, like just the theoretical volume landmark concepts are still there.
Yeah,
it's not,
they don't disappear.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I do it for myself and clients as well, and also did it in my last mini cut with the more steady volume, and also reducing the volume to about MEV levels for
it's horrible.
For a gaining phase. Why did you just say that it's horrible? What was
I said it. I haven't actually done it myself yet. I haven't gone through a mini cut at minimum effective volumes. But I say it's horrible because I have clients who just complain because they're used to the increases in volume. So then they're going in the gym and they're doing this minimum effective volume, and they're like, "But Steve, I could do more." And I'm like, "Yeah, but hold back. It'll be so much worth it once you come out." So yeah, they're kind of trying to get out of their mini cut as fast as possible, which is exactly what you want to do.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely. I had some great results with that approach, actually.
Yeah, you find, I was just going to say, I found when I have done kind of primer phases similar to that, but you'll see it even more so, is that you kind of see a bit of a recomp when you come out and you raise your volumes, you increase your you're in a calorie surplus, you see a recomp. You probably would never know how you'd assess this, because that you need expensive tests to try and see that you've gained muscle in this period of time. You'd probably only be seeing kind of the glycogen and water storage anyway. And you look, but the recomp in your eyes, at least, you go from being like pretty flat and depleted and then massively pumped with carbs and higher volumes. So it's pretty nice.
Yeah, maintenance phases, I had some good experience with as well. Also just like having fun again in your training, and just doing everything like just nutritional wise, eating in a surplus, and just training hard again, and training in a higher rep range, and just having pumps, as you said. And I think it's a great approach. Just go for it.
I was just going to say, the only year to include, you touched on a nice point in that you talked about kind of the psychology as well, which is massively important. When I didn't use the concept of the volume landmarks and kind of a bit of a phasic approach to my training, my motivation to train just was not as high. Whereas now using them, I'm more so like chasing things. I understand when you know the why, it's so much easier to do the how. I always say that to my clients. Like when I explain the why to them, they're then so much more adherent. They're so much better at doing things, and they put more into it. And when they can see their training laid out in front of them, they understand why they're doing specific things. It just makes it so much easier to kind of do it, and you're so motivated to do it because you know why you're doing it, and then what the end result's going to be. So the psychological component within the volume landmarks, I don't think it's often talked about. So I thought that was a good inclusion.
Cool. Let's talk about the recent critics of the volume landmarks, and what you think are the main reason for it.
Cool.
Yeah, do you just want
Oh,
to start, or that was actually kind of like a question. Um, so
I'm trying to actually remember the exact. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact critiques. The normal critiques I see are normally down to a misunderstanding of the
yeah,
concept, and
definitely.
I've even done. I ages ago wrote this article on my website when I was doing a few. I was basically. I loved MRV. I loved the idea behind it. I loved the volume landmarks, and so I was trying to spread it more. So I was doing articles on it as a side to kind of explain my experience with a lot of the things. And I did the fatal flaws with MRV,
Another
and one
one.
of yeah, the first one was the name. I was like, my goes to tell you, idiot, why did you call it MRV? You should have called it MAV, because everyone assumes that they should be training at their MRV all the time, whereas you actually want them to be at their maximal adaptive volume. So that was my first critique. Then another one was the fact that people don't realize different kind of exercises cause different amounts of fatigue. So like a deadlift, you can't assume is going to need the same amount of kind of cause the same amount of disruption as kind of a leg curl or a back extension. And then other people don't understand that you have to split it between muscle groups, and then they don't really know how to split it between them, and they get very confused about like a chest press. Do you just count that as chest MRV, or do you count it towards your triceps? And this is why you have to realize it's a concept and a theory and a way to auto-regulate your training, and you can't be so precise with such a thing.
Yeah.
Because yes, your triceps are involved with your bench press. Do you then count that towards your tricep volume? Maybe. You possibly could, but the most important thing is you keep that consistent and you understand that kind of, and when you're reporting your training, you're assessing all the time, and people get very hung up on how to actually equate that. Other kind of critiques of MRV, I think mostly are down to the fact that I think you should be training balls to the wall all the time, and that is certainly not what Mike was trying to get across. And I think he said several times on podcasts that he's actually came out with the term to prevent people to go there, because to realize that kind of there is a cost. You can't just add stuff. It's like, okay, my biceps are lagging, I'm just going to add some more curls this week. And the thing is, you can't just add it. You have to think, right, so how's that going to impact my total ability to recover? Am I going to then sacrifice pulling volume because I've added some more bicep curls? So it wasn't just about doing more and doing the most you can do. It was more about kind of, there is this limit to how much we can do. Be aware of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think most of it just comes down to misunderstanding, and not just not reading Mike's stuff. And also, one of the best arguments is like, Mike's not Natty.
Oh yeah,
And
I was going to say this is one that would come up.
I mean, did I just said this? Like, just as a disclaimer, actually, I think Mike Israetel is natural, and before like Renaissance periodization or Mike wants to sue me, I didn't say that. But
You can't clarify for fact that he is or not. So he likes to think in a parallel universe that he
yeah,
would maybe not be.
yeah, I think he said it officially on some pod. Was it? I think it was on the round table with Eric. He just said like, "Oh, did I just said it?" And then I was like, "Oh no, I'm Natty." But yeah, and I think just like lacking practical application of it is also one of the reasons why a lot of people just don't understand it. I think it's also super important to have some system in place to just track everything and see how you respond to it, and not just like assuming it's your MRV or your MEV. Just like track it, reflect it, and then progress from there.
Hmm. No, exactly. That's completely right. It's a concept to be used to kind of understand how volumes are going for you and auto-regulating. Yeah, the whole argument about kind of being on special sports supplements and stuff. The fact is, that doesn't influence the theory. The theory still applies the
Yeah,
same way. It's just like guys who are like the Mr. Olympias are still training freaking hard. They still have to apply to a lot of the same rules we have to. They just can do it on an extra kind of special level, and they can diet extra hard. They can push training extra hard. You just have to apply concepts to you as an individual and your responses. And everything Mike puts out is more so directed to people who are drug free.
Yeah, actually, if we can dive into this pro versus reactive approach of Eric Harms versus Dr. Mike Israetel again, I think that was a really good discussion that we just had before I pressed record.
So yeah, I think this is, and I wouldn't want to put words in either of their mouths.
Yeah.
But the way I theorize both of their ways of, and this is something that we may be delving into on my podcast with some people in terms of programming for hypertrophy, and we might hear it from the horse's mouth. In that, I don't know if you even know that phrase because it's quite a British thing. But anyway, I'll continue. So the way I see it with Eric, if we look at the schema or the graphic that he has in the muscle and strength pyramids, it's kind of like whether or not to add volume or take away volume, deload, and it's kind of like, are you progressing, blah blah blah, and you do a test at the end of a mesocycle, and it's kind of like, have you progressed? If you haven't, are you recovered? If you're not recovered, you reduce. If you are recovered, then you add more. And that in itself seems reactive. So you're kind of like, you've done all this work, now you're assessing how was it. Whereas, which is just like, I don't know, you might do a project to look how much money you earn, and then you assess whether you should have done something differently, which is absolutely fine. I understand the logic behind looking at it and how that's gone. Whereas Mike is more so looking at kind of things at the time. How's your recovery? How's performance? Should we add some more now? And it's more proactive. So on a microcycle to microcycle basis, Mike is doing that sort of assessment every week to make sure that because he talks about MAV as something that does move. So kind of once you've hit your lower end of MAV, next week it's a little bit more. So you have to kind of look at where you are, or maybe you overshot it. You have to come down a little bit. Whereas Eric, with the level approach, is kind of like, right, we're starting at this level. We're going to go across here. At the end of the mesocycle, we'll test. Was that level enough? Yes or no? Let's add or take away. And that's more reactive in nature. And yeah, that's kind of the proactive to reactive sort of discussion that I think we were having.
Cool. Really interesting, actually. My 2 cents of this I also want to include were actually that in the end, if you follow any of the top experts in the field of exercise science, like for me, like the top 3 or 4 people probably right now in terms of hypertrophy or strength building are Brad Schoenfeld, Eric Harms, Dr. Mike Israetel. I should have said Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, Dr. Mike Israetel, Dr. Eric Harms, and also Dr. Mike Thodos, I think. And he also said to me at the conference, at the 3DMJ conference last year in July with Eric and him, that in the end, if you follow any of the approaches of any of those guys, you will be in a good spot. And in the end, every one of them is evidence-based. Every one of them use the basic good principles we know that are actually important, and how you in the end apply it is like the results will be pretty much the same, like at least to some extent. And I think it's just like it comes down to preference and individualization. Oh man.
Yeah. No, I mean,
yeah.
Sorry, I just had, because I don't know why I've become loving analogies, and I just thought of a perfect analogy for this. It's like if you're looking to buy some squat shoes, if you buy like Nike, Adidas, or I don't know, another brand of squat shoe, Reebok. Yeah, there you go. Nike, Adidas, or Reebok. If you buy the top of the line squat shoe, they're all going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Whether you like the colors produced at Adidas or the colors produced at Nike, or the foot positioning and how that kind of is feeling on your foot at somewhere else, that's down to you. It's individual preference. But if you buy any of them, they're all going to provide you brilliant results. So I think, yeah, that's an easy way to think about it. But I think you're completely right. If you follow someone in the top of the field who's following the basic scientific principles, then the minute details are minute details that aren't probably going to make that much difference.
Yeah, I think you can easily take like an Eric Helms, like a Dr. Eric Helms, Dr. Mike Israetel, and Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, and they will all write you different programs that probably look a good amount of, like there's probably a good amount of difference there. I know that Brad, like Schoenfeld's approach is also really different to the one to Eric and Mike. And yeah, I just wanted to say that. I just wanted to include that.
Yeah, we're not saying they're carbon copies, just like a Nike Romelio isn't the same as like an Addy Pure or whatever they are, an Addy Power. They are different and they provide, but the overall grounding baseline of the principles are there. So like it's got a hard sole, it's got a raised heel, it's got straps. That's all going to be the same, but there's going to be differences there. They're going to look like completely different shoes.
Fuck Adidas.
All about Romelios, right? You got the Romelio 2s.
Yeah, the black ones. I think you have them too, right?
I've got white and red ones, yeah.
You have 2 pairs, man. Fancy.
No, sorry, they're white. I would love to have more than 1 pair, just to be kind of fashionable at the gym. I don't squat enough to appreciate that.
Yeah, I actually bought them like, I think 2 or 3 years ago even, and they're just like super... now I'm doing an advertising for Nike. So buy Romales. That would be awesome, man. Like Nike sponsoring would be my end goal. Cool. Do you have from your side anything that you want to include about practical application of the volume concepts?
I don't think so, but I think my final advice would be it's all well and good listening to the podcasts, listening to us talk about it, but there's nothing like getting it from the horse's mouth and reading the scientific principles of strength training by Mike Israetel.
Yeah.
Because if you read that, you'll understand them. And I should say it's also James Hoffman and Chad Wesley Smith co-authored that book as well. It wasn't just Mike. But if you read that and you read kind of the articles by him on the volume landmarks, then you can have a real understanding about it, because I think a lot of people end up picking at bits and they don't have a full understanding of it. But really the picking should come after you've had that grounding understanding. It's kind of like you learn how to drive with the driving instructor, then you go out on the roads and you do stuff and you learn more about driving. Chuck out another analogy.
You're kind of getting to the analogy how you say it, game. Analogy
game, yeah.
Yeah, I think I know from who you have that. Yeah, cool. I think there was a good roundup, and I think we covered some good things that we actually discussed. So thank you again for being on here. And maybe you can tell the listeners, the audience, where they can find you and what your social medias are. And I will obviously include them all in the description, but just to include them in here.
Cool. No, yeah, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you doing this, bearing with me in my English language. It's an honor to be on, and really fun discussion about these things, because I think often we talk to experts or we listen to experts, but actually as practitioners, it's useful to actually talk to one another to see how we utilize these things in practice. So that's great. And if people do want to learn more about me, about Revive Stronger, probably go to revivestronger.com. We've got everything on there. The podcast is on there. We've got old articles on, well, not old. Well, they're fairly old. Articles on there, but people love them. And then mostly you'll find us on Facebook, Instagram. We do infographics all the time. Similar to Jean's infographics that are brilliant as well. So Revive Stronger, anywhere, you'll find us.
Cool. So actually what I just wanted to include, you talked about the scientific principles of strength training. You should probably include the volume books as well that Mike just released. I think they're a good addition to the scientific principles. I've read both books, and yeah, for people just to clarify all the misunderstanding that is out there.
No, 100%. I think I think if people are going to critique something, they should really know what they're critiquing before they try and critique it, if that makes sense. Because it's kind of like, well, you can't really, the critiques don't have any standing when they're talking about something that is completely not relevant. And they're kind of making what's it called, a straw man.
Yeah, cool. So Steve, I thank you again, and check out Revive Stronger, and we will see. We will chat soon.
Cheers, guys. Thank you for listening.
Thanks.